Over the last 25 years or so, Audi has dominated the fast estate car market. Whether it was the RS2, the RS4 or the mighty RS6, if you wanted something quick that could haul around your IKEA luggage at serious speed, then you'd go down to your local Audi dealership. However, the last few years there's been a bit of a shift because despite the dwindling popularity of the estate body style, BMW decided out of nowhere pretty much that it was going to start making fast wagons again. And thus we have two of the finest examples of the breed, courtesy of Munich.
I'm not trying to start a BMW versus Audi war here, but we have tested both the M5 and the M3 Touring against the RS6, and in both cases the BMW came out on top. Not to mention the Audi is at the end of its long production run. The point is, if you want a fast estate these days, you buy a BMW.
But which BMW? The smaller, lighter M3 Touring that costs from £92,000 or the larger, heavier, hybrid M5 Touring that costs from £114,000?
Well, today I'm going to find out, and I'm going to start with the looks of these cars because it's very controversial. Each launched a few years apart, but the response to the styling of both was pretty much the same in that a lot of people just didn't like them.
However, I don't know if it's just me or the passing of time, but I now think that the M3 Touring is actually quite a good looking car. It's well proportioned, it's got a nice distinctive front end, and it's also quite muscular looking, which is what you want from a BMW M car. The M5 Touring, however, I'm not totally sure about yet. It obviously looks very large, it's a little bit bulbous, and that front end just isn't as distinctive as the one on the M3 Touring. They both look good from the rear and from the side, but again, I think the M3 has the edge. So for me, from a styling point of view, it's a win for the M3 Touring.
Next up, driving, and I'm going to start in the M5 Touring.
Now, one of the things you've got to remember about this car is that BMW said they didn't want to compromise anything. They wanted a car that could do it all. And when it comes to estates, that's a good idea. You want it to have a broad bandwidth. However, the upshot of that, and including a 4.4 litre twin turbocharged V8 and a plug-in hybrid system, is that this car weighs 2.4 tonnes. And yeah, sure, the 1.9 tonne M3 Touring isn't light either, but there's still half a tonne difference there, which is a lot.
From a comfort point of view, this isn't the end of the world. I took this very M5 Touring up to Scotland and back earlier this year, and I honestly couldn't think of a better car for the trip. It monstered the drive.
Around town or on slower, bumpier roads, the ride is okay. It doesn't completely iron everything out. You do feel that this is inherently a stiff performance estate car, but overall it's very, very usable. And you've also got that plug-in hybrid element. Now, BMW said that it's there to gain extra performance, or rather to enable them to keep the V8, which is fair enough, fine by me. But you're still getting about 20-25 miles of real-world electric range, which if you've got a 5-mile commute, I mean, that's ideal. And also, something else about plug-in hybrids that are attached to very big engines is that if you need to charge the battery from the engine, then you don't really care about knackering your fuel economy because, well, it already wasn't going to be that great. So actually, this battery doesn't really seem to run down. You can just keep driving it and it keeps itself nicely topped up, which is useful.
Speaking of which, the M5's V8 on its own produces 577 brake horsepower, more than the straight 6 in the M3 Touring. Combined with the electric element, it's up to 717 brake horsepower and 738 pounds-foot of torque. Despite the weight, it is breathtakingly quick.
There's just so much torque that it piles on the speed so effortlessly. But then, if you want to rev it out, it's still entertaining. It doesn't just completely run out of puff. This is, hybrid or no hybrid, still a really nice engine. Sounds good as well. And it just pulls. Oh my word. What an engine. And the gearbox as well, you know, it's not a snappy dual clutch, but it still does a very good job of shuffling through the ratios. Ooh. This is good fun. It's a very big car, but it's also a very fun car.
The M5 Touring does exactly what a fast estate is supposed to do. Seeing that large rear window so far away from you in the rearview mirror, it somehow feels like a bit of a bus, a traditional wagon when you're driving normally. But then you flick an M button and suddenly all hell breaks loose, and you've mostly forgotten about the whole practicality thing.
You can tell that BMW has worked really hard on making this car still feel like a proper M car, despite its weight. And I'm not going to say that it's a 100% success, because it is heavy, and you can feel that at times. But you know what? The way that it goes through corners is so nice, because it turns in well. You've got to be a little bit patient mid-corner, but then if you want it just to tighten its line a bit, you can get on the accelerator. The rear end is so playful under power, but also so controllable. It breaks grip so slowly, and then it gains it so gradually that you can have an infinite amount of fun just getting on the power a little bit too early everywhere. Don't know how long your rear tyres will last, but it's good fun. There's something else with this car that's interesting, is that the steering is so sharp that you may have noticed I hold the wheel differently in this car. So normally I'd have my hands at 9 and 3, which is what you're supposed to do if you're doing some enthusiastic driving. But with this, I have my hands a bit lower down, because it just feels like it's so pointy. You can do all the steering just by moving the wheel a little bit that way and a little bit that way. It doesn't need a big armful to get it to turn. And yet somehow it's not overly nervous or fidgety on the motorway. Don't know how they've done it, but it's really clever. I mean, I know when all is said and done that dynamically the M3 Touring, it will be better on this type of road, but I really like the way that this car has shown that super large estates that are RS6 sized can actually have a little bit more about them. The RS6, as brilliant as it was, the drive was more one-dimensional. This, you can do more with it, you can play more with it, and you can have more fun.
So, the M5 Touring is excellent to drive. It nails the everyday bits and is still somehow genuinely good fun when you want it to be. But stepping straight into the M3 Touring, and well, I'd be lying if I said that the half-ton weight difference and narrower body don't make a big difference on these country roads.
Just simply placing this M3 Touring on the road is easier. Because it's narrower, I can think more about driving it and less about what could be coming the other way, because I know that if I stay right to the left-hand side, I'll be absolutely fine. Whereas in the M5 Touring, sometimes it still hangs out a little bit over the right. But despite that extra weight and that extra width, there are definitely bits about the M5 Touring that I prefer when it comes to driving it quickly on a twisty road, which I wasn't expecting. For example, for road driving, I just prefer the way that the M5 picks up its power. It seems a bit smoother, a bit more linear, a bit creamier. This is more frantic, whereas the M5 just feeds it in really nicely. Also, the steering. Now, this wasn't what I was expecting, but the M3 Touring, even when I've got the steering in the sport mode, so it should be heavier, the steering is much lighter, and I'm not averse to light steering. But the M5, it just feels a bit more positive, and having that weight behind it does give you a little bit more confidence, I think. I also prefer the MDM setting in the M5 because in this it still seems keener to hold on to it for longer, whereas in the M5, and it could just be because of how much torque there is on offer, you can rotate it through a corner just by giving it a little bit extra throttle a little bit too early on, and it shifts itself and it rotates really nicely, whereas in this you have to be a bit more committed, which is surprising.
The M3 Touring is definitely louder in the cabin and it's got more frantic energy to the sound, but I prefer the noise of the M5 Touring even if it is a little quieter inside. It's just smoother and it feels more authentic.
Coming through a tight sequence of bends, this M3 Touring, it feels more authentic in how it tackles them. The M5 is very impressive. It shouldn't be as agile as it is, but you can tell that it's employing lots of trickery and maybe a little bit of sleight of hand to make that massive car feel lighter and feel more agile, whereas with this M3 Touring, it's not having to try as hard. It's just a lighter, more nimble chassis naturally. And as a result, you've just got more information coming through the car. I mean, this carbon seat, I'm sure that helps, but I can feel more of the road surface through it.
The flip side of that, however, is that the M3 Touring is not as comfortable as the M5 Touring, which is not going to be any great surprise. At low speeds, I don't think there's as much in it as you might expect, but you do really notice the difference in road noise at higher speeds when you're on a coarse surface. The M5 Touring is a wonderful motorway cruiser.
And I think that invites an interesting question, because the Audi RS6 became such a dominant fast estate car because I think Audi realised that the fast estate customers, they weren't after something which was necessarily the sharpest car dynamically. They wanted something that was brilliantly quick, it could crush long distances, sounded good, and it was a bit of a status symbol. And I think that M5 covers that base really well, whereas this M3 Touring, it is a slightly more raw, more focused performance car underneath, whereas the M5 Touring, it can do that, not quite as well, but it can do that. But just the general use and the everyday use means that it has actually a greater bandwidth.
I'm going to stick my neck out here and say that as a fast estate, versatility is key, and thus the M5 Touring's greater everyday usability just about overcomes the slight dynamic shortfall versus the M3 Touring, and thus it takes the point in the driving section of this test. Next up, it's time to look at the interiors.
By and large, I really like the cabin of the M3 Touring. Ergonomically, it's excellent. Pretty much everything is exactly where I want it to be. I've got a proper gear lever, which you have to move across and up to put it in reverse, which feels super satisfying. And it's also something to rest your hand on when you're driving along. I absolutely love that. And so few cars now have a proper gear lever. So big plus point there. And there's also lots of physical shortcut buttons too. So a big fan of that. However, one thing that I have noticed in here is this is the first time I've been in an M3 Touring, or indeed any kind of M3 or M4, that doesn't have carbon trim and carbon paddles. And I've got to say, I think it's worth getting those, getting the carbon pack, because this I can live with, but the paddles, they really don't feel very special. And I'm pretty sure they're exactly the same paddles as you would get in a bog standard BMW 320i, which for an M3, it just feels a little bit disappointing. So worth getting the carbon pack. These seats as well, they're about £4,500 worth, I believe. The M carbon bucket seats, I really like them, especially because of the driving position. You can sit so low in this that you would not know you're in an estate car. There's no compromise there at all. The driving position is fantastic. They won't be to everyone's taste, not least because of the garish colours, but you don't have to have those, but largely because of the big carbon piece in between your legs. And also, I suspect for some people the lumbar might not be great and they also might feel a little bit tight. But I would definitely try them because I think they're fantastic because of the driving position that you can get.
The M3 Touring sets a high benchmark, but can the M5 Touring match or even beat it?
Well, clearly there's a bit more space in here. That's because the M3 Touring is 1903mm wide, whereas the M5 Touring is 1970mm wide. It's not a deal breaker, but you can tell the difference. What you'll also notice is that this cabin is an entire generation ahead of the M3 Touring, completely irrespective of the fact that it's a whole class above, but the design language has moved on significantly from when that car came out. That's not necessarily saying that it's better, but it's just the design decisions that have been taken. So we've got no gear lever, which I think is a bit of a shame. We've still got the same kind of physical-ish shortcut buttons around the center console, which is very useful. But the steering wheel, it feels a bit chunkier than the M3 Touring, which I've got to say I'm not a fan of, although I wouldn't swear it's bigger. I think it's just the design of it, which also gives you that impression because the M1 and M2 buttons are also larger. But my real issue is with these buttons on the spokes because they just look cheaper than the ones on the M3 Touring, which absolutely shouldn't be the case with the M5. They look quite plasticky and they're not all physical buttons, which is a bit of a shame. The paddles are better. I don't believe they are carbon, but they feel a bit more premium, a bit more tactile, and they're larger, which is never a bad thing. And also we do actually have carbon in here, which I believe is optional, and that's on the fascia there, and it looks very, very good indeed. But then the center console hasn't got that carbon. It's piano black, which everyone knows looks brilliant when it comes out of the factory, but then after a bit of wear and tear, it starts to get scratched up and it doesn't look anywhere near as nice. So it's a shame that we haven't got that carbon on here.
Controversially, I am a fan of the ambient lights in the M5 Touring. I think they look great at night, but like in the M3 Touring, I'd much rather have carbon trim on and around the center console rather than piano black. You can get that for an extra £400, whereas in the M3 Touring, it's an extra £1,200.
Clearly, this M5 has a very 2025 interior, and I mean that because of the way it's been designed. It's more minimalist, and also the screens, they feel like they play a larger part in here than they do in the M3 Touring, especially from a design point of view, but also how things have, well, been cut, I guess is the way to say it, because there's less going on around the steering wheel. I prefer the buttons on the steering wheel of the M3 Touring. I also prefer the gear lever on the M3 Touring. And I don't think that you're actually losing out on any kind of tech in that car either. It's got everything you could possibly want. So it doesn't really feel like you're losing an entire generation's worth of progress.
For me, that's a clear win for the M3 Touring. But next up, it's practicality. So can the larger, heavier M5 Touring convert that into more space in the back seats and the boot?
In the back of the M3 Touring now, and I'm pleasantly surprised because even behind my own driving position, when I've got it set pretty low, I can get my feet underneath the seat in front, which is great. I've got lots of knee room, and I've also got loads and loads of headroom. And I have noticed something about this carbon seat as well, in addition to what I mentioned earlier, is that because of the holes in it, you can put your hands through and tickle the driver, which don't tell me that your kids won't do that. That might be another reason for potentially swerving them. But yeah, in terms of space, it's really good. Obviously there is a central tunnel because this isn't an electric car, so you've got to remember that there's not really going to be anywhere at least straight in front of them for the middle seat passenger to put their feet. But we have got two USB-C points, we've got climate control, there's two vents, we've got two ISOFIX, we've got enough storage space, we've got the handles there. I believe you can get blinds for the rear window. There's a couple of cup holders in the armrest. And honestly, you could easily spend a long journey in the back here and not be uncomfortable at all. So this is a pleasant surprise. So I've just climbed out of the M3 Touring and into the back of the M5 Touring, and it's quite interesting. And I'll get onto the space in a sec, but first off we'll go through the tech. So we've got USB-C point here and also one there, and it's hidden, which is quite nice. And there's also two USB-C points in the middle there. We've got a dual zone climate control, which you only get one zone in the M3 Touring, and there's also, as part of the comfort pack, heated seats in the M5 Touring for the outer rear passengers, which is nice. We've got a similar amount of storage space down here, and then the panoramic roof, I think that's worth it because you get an awful lot of light in and it makes sitting in the back a more pleasant experience. So I'm a big fan of that. And we've also got the center armrest with the cup holders and the ISOFIX points, which are nice and easy to access. But, and this is where it gets interesting, I don't think there's as much space for my feet underneath the front seat as there was in the M3 Touring. I can only think it's because that's got a thin carbon seat and this has got much bigger, plusher, leather, executive style seats. So that's interesting. Knee room, I'm behind my own driving position again, but I don't feel like I've got any more space in the M5 Touring than I did in the M3 Touring. So that's quite interesting. And then headroom with the panoramic roof, which usually robs space. I've got to say, it's really rather generous. I think I've got as much, if not a bit more, than the M3 Touring, which is great. There's a little bit more space for my elbows, but it's not the kind of difference I was expecting given the extra size on the M5 Touring. So I think for rear seat passenger space, this thing just about wins it, but not as much as you might expect.
As for the boot space, there's something quite peculiar in the brochure. Both the M3 Touring and M5 Touring have the same claimed 500 litre boot space with all seats in place. The M5 Touring wins 1630 litres to 1510 litres with the seats folded down, but even so, that initial figure seems a bit surprising, especially when the M5 Touring clearly has a longer load bay.
Both cars have an electric tailgate as standard, which is very useful, of course, but what the M3 Touring has and the M5 Touring does not have is the split tailgate. So you can just open that up and pop your shopping in like so. That's great. But I've got to say, overall, for rear seat practicality and boot space, the M5 Touring wins just.
On paper then, that's a 2-1 overall win for the M5 Touring. But it's not that simple. Price obviously comes into it, and in the UK there is around a £20,000 difference between the two cars. However, in other territories such as Ireland and Poland, we have heard of the M5 Touring coming out cheaper because it attracts less tax owing to its, on paper, lower CO2 figure. Also, I'd say that if you want to take your fast estate on track, then the M3 Touring is definitely the one to go for, or better still, the awesome M3 CS Touring that I reviewed recently. But overall, if I had to pick between the M3 and the M5 Touring, money no object, it's the larger, heavier M5 Touring that gets my vote as the best fast estate. It's got greater bandwidth, it's slightly more usable and comfortable, yet it doesn't disappoint on the faster roads. Both cars are undoubtedly brilliant in my eyes, but the M5 Touring just about gets my vote. Do you agree? Is the M5 Touring the ultimate fast estate car? Let us know in the comments section below.